My name is Mo and I produce metal, and today I want to show you some techniques to get a sound like this. Now, as you can hear, I've opted for quite a high-pitched snare sound to really be able to handle all of the fast parts that this deathcore music has. I'm talking about parts like this. When it comes to the breakdown section, it does sound heavy, but it can get a bit weak as to what the music needs. I mean, nothing wrong with that sound, right? But there are a few things we can do to really beef up the snare sound here. What I've done is that I'm sending some sounds from Damage 2 out to a bus that I can then automate up to really beef up the snare for breakdown sections. So it sounds like this. But currently it's very quiet, so let's remedy that. This really helps the breakdown stand out a bit more, while still having this high-pitched snare sound to handle the faster parts of the song. Another great thing about having the high-pitched snare is that it really catches the ghost notes like here super nicely. I'm just quickly gonna show you what snare samples I'm using. I'm using the high-pitched Matt Halpern signature snare from P5. I am using the reference brass from P4. I am then also using the new One Kit Wonder Brutal snare. And finally, I have the same snare sample as I have in my drum mixing tutorial, which I'm linking here, which has the Pearl Vinnie Paul snare from Modern Massive, but just using the room sample. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for reaching 7,000 subscribers. I'm thrilled about this. If you like this style of metal mixing tutorials, consider subscribing to the channel if you're not already. Okay, so let's get into some other layering that's going on. For this album, we're using MIDI bass, we're using Jim Bass 2, and this is the main sound. But I then saw a technique on URM that I wanted to try, which is to pitch the bass an octave up. Now in the example that they showed, they were using an octave pedal on the bass DI, but since we have MIDI bass, I thought why not just duplicate it and just shift the MIDI one octave up. And then we have this sound. So it's exactly the same, but one octave above. I am then using a lot of compression for the space. I'm also boosting the transient with the transient shaper to really get the pick attack sound that I'm really after for this high-pitched bass sound. Next, I have Saturn on the warm tube. I am driving it 50%. Just adding a little bit of sparkle. Pro MB, just keeping it a bit under control. Next, some EQ. I want to remove all the low end from this signal because I just want the high end sound of the bass. So this sounds quite ridiculous on its own, but it's gonna make sense shortly, I promise you. Limiter. Because I found some stray peaks still from the pick attack, so I wanted to tame them a bit more. And finally, just soothe, smoothing it out even more. So a super heavily processed and compressed sound, but when you then blend it in with the normal bass sound, you get this really nice definition on the high end. So yeah, thank you to URM for showing me this trick, and here I put my own spin on it. Next is a trick that I've shown before, which is to use a Growler synth. Here I'm using the Anna 2 on the Gorilla preset. Here I'm just pushing it through Saturn on warm tube driven to 100%. And I am removing all of the side information below 176 Hz and just removing some low-end mud here. And layered with the normal bass sound. Next we have a stereo bass sound, which is using the nollie bass. It doesn't necessarily need to be the nollie bass, but just use a different library from your main bass sound to avoid phase issues. Both the growler and the stereo bass are playing 1 octave above the main bass tone to really get this definition. Now here I'm after a wide bass sound that can blend a bit with the guitars. Without anything, it's just a DI. Starting with the little altar boy and spiff. Just creating an octave sound, blending in 50% here from little altar boy, boosting the pick attack a bit with spiff. After spiff, I am engaging the Growler plugin, which is using the phaser and the amp, but no cab here. Then I have Saturn just doing warm tape, shaping it kind of like an IR here. And I also then just have a gate to keep it super, super tight. Now the magic starts to happen when we use the effect rack from Sound Toys, which is using Devil Lock, Decapitator, adding a ton of saturation and distortion, but then the micro shift, which is the thing that is widening the sound and really is getting, the sound that I'm after. Next, some tape saturation and EQ, removing some low mids here. I mainly want a pretty mid-heavy sound, which has some growl to it to really fill in this space of the mix. I don't want it to have too much top end or bass. Then just keeping it super level with some subtle compression. So together, here's where we're at. What is also great about having the bass on different tracks like this is that later in the mix you can then level them how you please. Maybe for a certain part of the mix you want the wide bass sound to come through a little bit more, then you just automate the volume up. So the final part is that I have a sub-bass layer. This is something new that I haven't done before, but I'm using a sub-bass preset I made here in Anna 2, which sounds like this. Okay, I am then adding even more bass to it at 40 Hz using the R-Bass plugin. Saturn at clean tube, 50%. Pro MB, just keeping it super level, can be any compressor here. I just mainly wanted a really clean compressor. I don't want this thing to move at all. Relay is making it only be mono, because I only want this in the middle channel, really. Next, Soothe, just removing some muddy things down here mainly. You see certain notes are sticking out and Soothe is controlling it, so it's super consistent. And finally, just removing all the top and just keeping the bass. And this layer I'm only using at select parts of the song that I really want to stick out, mainly the breakdowns and the choruses. Finally, for this breakdown, I am using a choir sample here, which is the Olympus micro choir from Sound Iron, my go-to choir library. Just adding a dissonant layer on top, which really makes it sound a lot heavier and a lot more interesting. Okay, now we're in the mixing session and I'm going to add all of the layers in one by one, and you will be able to see the difference they make in the full context of the mix. If you like this music, be sure to follow Reminiscence to catch this song as soon as it drops.